As the darkness of the night slowly crept in, only illuminated by the red glow of the harvest moon, the crackling of a bonfire can be heard not far from the water's edge. Max and Oscar had already arrived at the bonfire, and were getting things set up by bringing logs to sit on and twigs for making s'mores. After they were done, the two sat across from each other and talked about camp as they waited for Hedgehog and Pepper to arrive. The four of them had decided that tonight, the night of the harvest moon, was a perfect time to sit around a campfire and tell scary stories. The quartet had been getting chummier lately as they hung out more and more, finding that even with all the craziness of camp they still found familiarity when hanging out with each other. Shortly after the two had finished a conversation about a recent baseball game, Hedgehog came up to them with Pepper close behind her. They were carrying s'mores supplies and drinks for the group. The four of them had the supplies for their little bonfire party shipped to the island, to make sure that nothing was alive. After everyone got settled and Max stared into the fire, the four of them had already decided who would be going first. So as the others got the food ready, Max cleared his throat. This story is called Open House, Closed House. It was a day like any other. A young iguana named Carlos was walking home from school with his friends. They were talking about the events of the day when all of a sudden Carlos stopped talking as they walked by an old broken down house. His friends knew why he had stopped. Ever since they were young, Carlos had a strange fear of the house, like something lurked within its walls waiting to gobble up any who walked by. His friends thought that it was childish for him to be afraid of something so simple as a house, so they taunted him, calling him a wuss and a coward. The young reptile told his friends that he wasn't afraid of the house, but they laughed at him anyway. With an angered puff he screamed out, "You want me to prove I'm not afraid?" His friends were startled by his sudden aggressive outburst, but they were curious. "Sure man, how about this? If you go up to the door and wait there for a full minute, I'll give you my favorite game." Carlos knew exactly what game he was talking about. His friend Jeremy had come into possession of a rare game that only printed about 10 copies. The others looked at Jeremy with surprise. They knew he would never give such a prized possession away so easily. "Deal," Carlos said as he headed towards the door. The house appeared to move and shudder as he got closer and closer to the door. "Why would you give that game away, man? That thing is impossible to get." Jeremy's friends scolded him, which he responded with a smirk. "You really think he'll stay there for even 5 seconds? He's just a big chicken." The group started laughing, loud enough for Carlos to hear, but he pushed their laughter out of his head as he stepped onto the doorstep. Carlos began to get a weird feeling, like he was being watched. He frantically looked around to make sure he wasn't. After all, no one was supposed to have been living there. The house had been abandoned many years ago after the previous owner's son went missing. Carlos shook his head, trying to shake the thought of the missing child from his mind as he looked at his watch. Time seemed to move more slowly. It felt like he had been standing there for years until finally his time was up. He laughed and turned to head back to the others. When he looked down, their expression changed from laughing to a horrified expression. He could see they were saying something, but the words seemed to fall into the abyss, like Carlos was trapped in a world without sound. It all happened so fast Carlos' mind couldn't process what had occurred as a hand wrapped around his head and waist, and he was yanked from the world he knew into the darkness of the house. It had only been a few minutes, maybe even a few hours, since Carlos had been brought into the house before he came to. The fear and panic of the whole situation had stopped his heart long enough to make him pass out. He woke up in a room with old wallpaper that was peeling, showing the state of decay of the wood underneath. He tried to get up but found that his leg had been chained to the wall. He screamed out for help, but he could tell that no one would be able to hear him. Carlos found a key not far from him and, with much effort, was able to grab the key and unlock himself from the wall. He noticed that there were 4 doors in the room. He ran to one and flung it open, throwing caution to the wind. As he opened it, He found that the entire doorway had been bricked up completely. He checked the next door and the one after that, still no luck. Finally, he opened the last door, hope slowly draining from him as he opened the door. He was surprised to see that the door actually leads somewhere. He ran out into the hallway and the door slammed shut behind him. He tried opening it again, but it seemed to be sealed shut. He took a deep breath and headed down the hall. As he walked down the hall, the walls seemed to get closer and closer together. He found himself having to squeeze through to get anywhere. He finally reached a dead end. As he turned to head back, he noticed that the wall behind him had been following his movement down the corridor. Carlos found himself now trapped in a boxed-off room, with seemingly no way to get out. He thought about his friends who had made him do this and wondered if they had gone for help. He wondered if they were even his friends in the first place as the room became smaller and smaller. Carlos thought about his family and whether they knew where he was or not. Had they gone to the authorities yet since he hadn't come home? As the room became the size of his full wingspread, Carlos began to lose hope and any resemblance of faith in his friends and family to save him.